Let me ask you, do you think we've seen the last of gangsters in the United States, the last of the Mafia, Cosa Nostra? Well, ABC thinks we have, and they did a show called The Last Gangster. And you know who they think it is? None other than Sammy the Bull Gravano. So let's take a look. Hey everyone, welcome to another sit down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is good on this end. Praise God for that. And today I'm going to do something some of you might be familiar with, but this past week on Channel 7 ABC, they had a 2-hour special called The Last Gangster. It was on ABC's 2020. And oftentimes they will go back and they will do an interview that appeared earlier, years earlier in some cases, and they'll do a story about it. And in this case, this story was about Sammy Gravano and an interview that he did in 1997 with ABC's Diane Sawyer. It was a long interview, I think a couple of hours back then, and it was very extensive. And this was a few years after things had changed with Sammy and John Gotti had been off to prison and Sammy was embarking on his new life. I got to tell you, it was an in-depth 2 hours. I think they did a good job on it. It was a pretty honest revelation, I would say, of Sammy's life then and now. They interviewed a lot of different people. I was one of them. I spoke mostly about the mob life, the mafia in general. But they interviewed FBI agents, they interviewed Ed McDonald, who was the head of the Organized Crime Strike Force. I don't think he prosecuted Sammy, but he did prosecute me. He was my prosecutor. I actually took the plea in the case that he presented against me. They interviewed Anthony Ruggiano, another mob guy. He was a Gambino family guy. His dad and my dad also made guys, as you know, were very close at one time. Anthony and I have become very friendly in the past several months. They also interviewed Terence Winter. Terence Winter is a writer. I think he wrote a lot of the Soprano episodes and he does a lot of the mob stuff. He's a very well-respected writer in the industry. They also interviewed Karen Gravano and Gerard Gravano, Sammy Gravano's two kids. They're not kids anymore, but hey, when you're 70, you can call people younger than you kids. And they talked a lot about the mafia life in the 70s and the 80s and so on and so forth. And it was really pretty well done. And you know, when you do these things, you never know how it's going to turn out. You know, the news media, they come to you like they're your friends and it's going to be a great interview and it's going to be a good series, and all of a sudden, wow, they do a hatchet job. I've seen that happen to me and to plenty of other people. But in this case, I think they did a fairly good job. You know, they interviewed people whose families they claim were victimized by Sammy. And again, I'm not saying anything out of turn. Sammy has admitted to certain things, both in this interview and later on his YouTube channel. So they interviewed people that might have been victimized by some of Sammy's activities back then. So it was pretty fair across the board, I think. And you know, normally I don't say that. You know, normally I say, oh, they did a hatchet job, but I thought they did a good job. One of the things that really impressed me were the fact that they talked about Sammy and his family life. And they said he had a great family life, that he really loved his family way back then. He would get home for dinner. He would go on vacations. He had property upstate New York and he took his family there. He loved his family and he was a good family man. And I can tell you this now, I didn't know Sammy back then, but I do know him now. And I can tell you the same thing. He's a good family man. He loves his family. I think everything that he's doing now in his later years is to try to set his family up properly, maybe change his legacy in a little bit and benefit his kids. I really believe that. He said that to me. I think that's the true case. So it was nice to hear that. But I think what really impressed me most about the whole 2-hour show was the interviews with Karen Gravano and Gerard Gravano. Now, I got to know Gerard fairly well. He's a nice young man. He really is. He loves his dad. He's just a good kid. And again, he's in his 40s, but I can call him a kid. I got to like him a lot. He's very sincere. I thought he came across very well in the interviews. He said he loved his dad. You can see the expressions and the feeling when him and Sammy were talking together. He just did a good job. And I like him a lot, and I know Sammy loves him. And Karen Gravano, I think I might have met her one time. I think years ago we were on the Ricky Lake show together, if any of you remember Ricky Lake. But we only met briefly, might have spoken for a few minutes or so, but I thought she came across extremely well last night. I really related to a lot of the things that she said. And she talked about, growing up with Sammy as her dad, Sammy being a mob guy, Sammy being a street guy, and she said some of the things that I really related to, because you know this, I grew up with Sonny Franzese. My father was a notorious figure at that time, a lot more notorious back then than Sammy was, because my dad was constantly under investigation, constantly in the media, always getting arrested, going on trial. I've seen that, my whole younger years. I know it's kind of difficult for children in that situation. Sometimes, you get harassed a little bit at school, whatever. But it's difficult seeing your father go through that. And she was honest about it. And she said, I never really knew what my father was doing. She knew that there was something different, but Sammy didn't come home and say, hey, you know what, I killed 3 people today, or I hijacked a truck, or I did whatever. I'm just making these things up. But he didn't come home and discuss those things with his family. The same way my dad never came home and brought the outside world into our household. In the house, he was dad. So we love our fathers for that. If they're good family, man, we love them. And I've always said this, children got to have a real reason not to love their parents. And maybe that reason is, you're not a good father or mother, or, you don't treat your spouse the right way. And the children see that, or you don't treat the children properly. But if he's out on the street doing things that you're not aware of, well, you love your dad. And if you cultivate that love throughout your life and then maybe later find out, like Karen did, what her father was really all about, well, you love your dad anyway. You don't turn against him. But what really got me was when she said she found out that Sammy cooperated, it really hit her. She was angry with her dad because she grew up in an environment in a neighborhood where you just don't do that. The word rat was just terrible. You never wanted to be called that, be associated with that in any which way. She was honest about it. For a while, she was angry with her dad about it. And, maybe she took some harassment from some of her friends about it back then, because you just didn't do that in Brooklyn way back when. And of course, Sammy was very, very highly publicized. So they had to go through a lot, both Karen and GERARD and their family. They just really did. And I think, Sammy certainly is remorseful of that. You don't want to bring that on your kids and on your family. And I'm going to tell you this, there's a lot of stuff being said about Sammy. There's a lot of stuff being said about me. Guys on the internet, they talk, and social media. I can tell you this, I'm not going to comment on what Sammy did or he didn't do in that regard. I think it all came out, and Sammy's honest about it, he talks about it. But you really don't know how you're going to react to a situation until you walk in that person's shoes. And the word rat is used so often, by a lot of social media warriors. They want to talk about people and they want to put labels on people and so on. And these are the same people that probably, if they were faced with any adversity in their life, they'd be the first one to get themselves out of trouble and do whatever they had to do. But that term is used quite a bit. It's talked about. Look, I'm not going to make any comment about that. Like I said, it all came out. Sammy talks about it, and there's no reason for that. But with respect to him and his kids and his family, he didn't want to bring any of that headache on any of them. And I believe that with all my heart, knowing Sammy now, and even more so after watching this, because it shows that he's always been a good family man. That was what impressed me most about the 2 hours. Talk about some other things. Anthony Ruggiano, he talked about his family, about his relationship, about his dad. He mentioned a little bit about Sammy. I thought he was very honest about it, and he came across very well. Some of the things that I enjoyed, they showed some of the old places that I used to frequent. Studio 54, a real hot spot back then. And yeah, we used to go there and we used to have a decent time. COPACABANA, they talked about that. I went there so many times with my dad. And yes, I did walk in through the kitchen with my dad. I don't know if Henry Hill ever did that without Paulie Vario or anybody alone, but certainly brought back some good memories. It also talked about the 70s and early 80s being the Wild West in New York, when the Mafia really controlled everything there. And we did. You know, we had a lot of control. We controlled politicians. We controlled all the unions. We controlled the restaurants and bars, and construction things were going on. You know, we really had a presence way back then. And I've said this many times, the golden years of the Mafia, Cosa Nostra, in New York especially, were from the 50s right through to the mid-80s when the racketeering laws came in, and you know the story, you know everything that happened after that. It really was a good, you know, depiction. I think it's on Hulu now. You can probably get it. I don't know what the deal is, whether you have to sign on to Hulu or you have to have the app or whatever it is, but I think it's going to be running consistently streaming on Hulu. Some of the other things that really got me, Curtis SLIWA. You know who Curtis is. He ran for mayor. He was defeated, but he was the guardian angel. And they featured him throughout the show because he was there through that era. And look, he doesn't like mob guys. You know, if you know the story with Curtis, he almost got killed. I mean, there was an assassination attempt on him that he says came from John Gotti Jr. I think he testified in John's trial. John was not convicted. He got a couple of hung juries on it. He didn't speak too fondly of Sammy and the life in general, but he's very colorful and he talks. And look, he's got his opinion and he gets out there and he says it with no holds back. And you know, he was a prominent figure throughout. They talked a lot about John Gotti, and John is such a controversial figure. I mean, you know, people loved him, people hated him. He was just a dynamic guy in every sense of the word. He captured the media like no other person has since the days of Al Capone, that's for sure. And you know, they asked me about him, and I said, listen, if you wanted to see the prototypical mob guy, you'd use John Gotti, because he was the guy at that time. He dressed the part, he had the charisma, he talked like a gangster. I think John didn't want to be anything in his life but a gangster. He made that well known, and that's who he was. So you give him credit for being true to who he was, wrong, right, or indifferent, whether you liked it or not. And what they did say really came out through interviews with John Miller, who was a reporter at the time, and through other people, FBI agents. They said that John Gotti was his own worst enemy, and really because he just captured too much attention. And you're really not supposed to do that on the street. You know, you're supposed to be low-key like the old-timers were, but John was of a different breed. He said a lot of things that were recorded on tape that really got him in trouble. You know, he was kind of loudmouthed in that regard. But hey, I'm not criticizing, and I'm not saying, look, they say that John Gotti was responsible for bringing the mob down. That's not true. John Gotti did not bring the mob down. The mob is still alive and kicking. It's different right now, but he didn't bring the mob down. That's nonsense. You know, he was one guy, and yeah, he brought damage mostly to himself. I mean, John didn't cooperate or go after anybody. He brought a lot of attention on himself, and he brought attention on the mob in general, but so did a lot of guys. It wasn't only him alone that did that. He just happened to be the one that was the most looked at. But they do tell his story, and I think it came out that Sammy, he wasn't happy with what he did, and he did have a strong relationship with John. You know, there was one scene in there, I think Anthony said that he was in John Gotti's presence along with Sammy, and as he walked up to greet the two of them, he held his hand out to shake hands with Sammy, and Sammy put his hands at his side and said, no, you shake John's hands first. And that was a sign of real respect. So you know that there was a respect, a mutual respect there at one point in time. And you know, like often happens in that life, things just go bad. It's a product of the life. There's a lot of jealousy in that life. There's a lot of envy in that life. There's a lot of intrigue, I would say. It's just part of the life. And it's unfortunate, but a lot of times the life itself is its own worst enemy. Look, I can go on and say a lot of things about it, but you know, again, my overall impression was that it was very well done. I think that Sammy was very, very honest, both back in 1997 and the way he spoke now. I thought Karen Gravano came across very honestly and sincerely, and I thought she did a great job. I thought GERARD, you know, I told you I like GERARD. I have a lot of feeling for him, and I thought he did a great job too. And in general, ABC did a good job. So I recommend that you watch it. Again, it's called The Last Gangster. It was on ABC. I think now you can stream it on Hulu. It was a good show. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. My inner circle, michaelfranzese.com. If you're not part of it, it's growing, and we're having a great time putting so much content in there. People are just enjoying one another, uplifting one another, encouraging one another. Business is occurring between it. We're giving them so much content, negotiation guides, leadership guides, workshops. I mean, it's been a blessing and a joy for me just to see how it's working out among everybody, and boy, is it growing. So the book, Mafia Democracy, stay tuned. It looks like now, we have a publisher involved in this. It'll be out late March, early April, but you're going to start to hear about it pretty soon. I'm very excited about it, and it's going to be eye-opening. I promise you that. My TV series, it's in development. There's one major actor that right now we may nail down to play the role of Michael, and if that happens, this thing is going to start to move along very quickly. I'm excited about that. The wine, Michael Franzese wine, I think shipments will start to fly in early February. So we got a lot of things going on, people. And thanks to all of you. Our channel is growing. Our subscribers are growing. We appreciate it. We thank you for enjoying the content. Know you have a lot of choices. So thanks a lot. We really do appreciate it. So that's it. How do I always leave you? Same way. Don't want to disappoint you. Be safe. Be healthy. I sincerely mean this. God bless all of you. And yes, I'll see you next time. Take care.